kind delivery girl saves dying stranger with her rare blood, and he turns out to be a vampire king. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. Lira had always lived a quiet, humble life, filled with the kind of simplicity that kept her grounded despite the challenges. Working as a delivery girl was never glamorous, but it paid the bills, just enough to take care of her sick grandmother. She had learned to live with little, always on the move, rushing through the crowded streets of the city to get her deliveries done before dark. On one such evening, a heavy storm had hit the city, forcing Lira to take a detour to avoid the flooded streets. As she navigated her way through the slippery sidewalks, clutching her bread basket tightly, she noticed a figure slumped against the cold brick wall of an alleyway. His clothes were torn, his body shivering under the pouring rain, and he seemed to be barely holding on to life. Lira paused for a moment, her instincts urging her to walk on, to ignore the stranger in need. But something about him, his pale complexion, his near-lifeless state, pulled at her heartstrings. She knelt down beside him, her fingers brushing his wrist, feeling for a pulse. Nothing. A soft breath escaped his lips, but it was faint, barely there. Without thinking, Lira reached into her bag for her phone, ready to call for help. But before she could dial, she noticed something strange. The man's body felt warm, too warm for someone in his condition. His skin, almost translucent in the dim light, didn't seem like that of an ordinary person. She hesitated, her heart racing with both fear and a sense of urgency. She couldn't just leave him here, could she? She had to do something. Thinking quickly, Lira gently shook him, trying to rouse him. "Hey, are you okay?" she whispered, her voice barely audible above the rain. There was no response. She bit her lip, debating what to do next. She had no medical training, no knowledge of what was wrong with him, but she couldn't leave him to die alone. In a moment of desperation, she did something she never thought she would. She pressed her palm against his cold lips, hoping her warmth would help. To her surprise, as soon as her skin touched his, a faint pulse, stronger than before, surged through his body. Lira gasped, pulling her hand away. His chest rose slightly as he took in a deeper breath. The man's eyes fluttered open, revealing a shocking glow, amber, almost unnatural. She recoiled, her heart pounding in her chest, as the realization hit her. This wasn't just some ordinary stranger. This man was something other. But before she could back away, he grabbed her wrist, his grip surprisingly strong for someone who had been on the brink of death. You saved me," he murmured, his voice raspy yet filled with an intensity she couldn't ignore. "Who are you?" Lira's mind raced, unable to process what was happening. She stammered, "I am just a delivery girl. I didn't know what else to do. You were dying." The man, now more alert, stared at her for a long moment, as if searching her soul. Then, he slowly let go of her wrist, his expression shifting to something that almost resembled awe. "You have no idea what you've just done." He struggled to sit up, his body still weak, but slowly regaining strength. "My name is Adrien," he said, his eyes locking with hers, a strange energy swirling around them. "I'm not just a man." Lira felt a chill run down her spine, a sense of danger creeping up her neck. Adrien. The name sounded ancient, foreign, like it didn't belong in this world. She could barely comprehend what was happening. Was he some sort of vampire? And if so, why had he come into her life? What did he mean by what you've just done? She didn't know it yet, but this encounter would change her life forever, pulling her into a world far beyond anything she had ever known. As Lira stepped back, her heart still racing from the encounter, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. The rain continued to pour, but the world around her seemed to blur as she focused on the man before her, Adrien. His amber eyes still glowed faintly, and, despite his pale complexion, his strength seemed to return with every passing second. He slowly rose to his feet, leaning against the cold stone wall of the alleyway. "I'm not human," he said softly, his voice filled with an unsettling calmness. Lyra's chest tightened. She wanted to ask him what that meant, but no words came out. Instead, she just stood there, frozen, watching him. I didn't mean to hurt you, Adrien continued, sensing her unease. But you've done something to me that no one else could. Your blood is different. You've healed me, and for that, I owe you everything. Lira blinked, trying to process what he was saying. Her mind was reeling. She was just a delivery girl. She didn't understand what was happening, but somehow, this stranger, no, this man, was telling her that she had saved him. The words made no sense, but the way he looked at her, his gaze intense and filled with something she couldn't identify, made her feel like she was part of something far bigger than herself. What are you? She finally managed to ask, her voice barely above a whisper. Adrien didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked away, his expression distant, as if he were struggling with the weight of something. I'm the Vampire King, he said after a long pause. Lyra's heart skipped a beat. Vampire King? It sounded insane, a fantasy from the pages of a book, but the way Adrien spoke, so calmly, so assuredly, made it impossible to dismiss. Adrien noticed her shock and let out a small, rueful laugh. I know it sounds unbelievable, but it's the truth. I've been cursed. For 50 years, I've been trapped in a sleep, my body dying, but never fully passing. 1,000 doctors, witches, and healers have tried to save me, but none succeeded. Your blood, Lira, it's the only thing that brought me back. Lira felt the weight of his words, but still, she couldn't fully grasp what he was saying. Why me? She asked, her voice trembling. Adrien took a step closer, his gaze never leaving hers. Because your blood is special. You may not know it, but it carries a rare magic, a power that has the ability to heal, to break curses, to bring the dead back to life. It's a bloodline that runs deep in your family, though you probably don't even realize it. Lira shook her head. I'm just a girl from the streets. I don't have anything special about me. Adrien's expression softened, and he reached out, gently cupping her face in his hand. You are more than you know, he said, his voice low and reassuring. I can feel it. You've been chosen, Lira. Chosen. The word echoed in her mind, a strange sensation creeping up her spine. She had never felt chosen in her life. She had always been just a girl, barely scraping by, trying to survive. But now, standing in front of this mysterious man, hearing the weight of his words, something deep inside her stirred. Something inside her told her that this was no accident. This was destiny. What do you mean, chosen? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. Adrien looked at her with a mixture of sorrow and longing. Your blood is tied to a curse that has plagued my family for centuries. It's a curse that, when broken, could change everything. But to break it, I need you. I need you to come with me. The storm continued to rage around them, but in that moment, everything seemed to fall away. Lyra's mind raced with questions, with doubts, with fears. She had no idea what she was getting into, but one thing was clear. Her life had just been turned upside down, and there was no going back. What if I don't want to go with you? She asked, her voice steady, though her heart was pounding in her chest. Adrien's expression softened, but there was a seriousness in his eyes that she couldn't ignore. Then you'll be putting both of our lives in danger, he said, his tone somber. The curse is not something you can run from. It's always been there, waiting for the right moment. And now, that moment has come. Lira swallowed hard, her mind racing. She wanted to turn away, to run back to her grandmother, to escape this nightmare. But something inside her, something deep down, told her that she couldn't. She was part of something bigger now, something that she had no control over. Where will we go? She finally asked, her voice trembling with uncertainty. Adrien took a deep breath, his gaze filled with determination. To my castle, he said. And from there, we will face whatever comes next. Together. Lira hesitated for a moment, looking at the man standing before her, a stranger who had somehow become her savior. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew that from this moment on, nothing would ever be the same. With a deep breath, she nodded. Okay, she said softly. I'll go with you. Lira followed Adrien through the pouring rain, her heart pounding with each step as they made their way toward the towering gates of his castle. The storm was relentless, but the closer they got to the ancient stone walls, the more she felt an inexplicable pull, a sense of something both terrifying and magnetic. Adrien had said that she was part of something bigger now, and though she still didn't fully understand, A strange certainty settled in her chest. She was no longer just a delivery girl. She was part of this world, this destiny that had somehow chosen her. The castle loomed ahead, its dark silhouette shrouded in mist, its windows glowing dimly from within. Lira had heard rumors about it in the village. The stories of the vampire king and his cursed son, locked away in this place for decades. But she never imagined she would find herself walking toward it, led by none other than the king himself. As they approached the large wooden doors, Adrien's hand lightly brushed hers, a gesture that felt oddly intimate. Lira glanced at him, unsure of what to make of the growing tension between them. Adrien had saved her, but she didn't know if she could trust him fully. She had only just met him, and yet she was already wrapped up in his world. "Welcome home," Adrien said softly as the doors creaked open. The inside of the castle was nothing like she had expected. It was grand, yet old, with stone walls lined with tapestries and glowing candles casting flickering shadows along the corridors. Lira felt small and out of place in the vast, ancient halls. "This is where I've been living for centuries," Adrien continued, his voice echoing in the empty space. "It's not much, but it's home." He led her down a long hallway, passing rooms she couldn't even imagine the purpose of. The castle seemed to stretch on endlessly. Finally, they reached a large chamber at the far end of the hall, where a fire burned brightly in a massive stone hearth. The room was warm and inviting, a sharp contrast to the coldness she felt outside. "You'll stay here for now," Adrien said, gesturing toward a plush armchair by the fire. "We have much to discuss." Lira sat down, her mind racing. Adrien hadn't given her any answers yet. He had only mentioned that she was chosen, and that her blood held some kind of power, but nothing made sense. She was still just a girl from the streets, with no special abilities or bloodlines. Why her? What did Adrien need from her? Adrien seemed to read her thoughts. He sat across from her, his amber eyes fixed on hers. "You have questions," he said, his voice calm, but with an underlying urgency. "I understand. But first, you need to know the truth about what's happening." Lira nodded, eager for answers. "What do you mean by chosen?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. Adrien leaned forward, his expression serious. "Your blood is the key to breaking a curse that has plagued my family for centuries. It's a bloodline that no one remembers, but it's been passed down through generations. Your grandmother, she knew of it, though she never spoke of it. And now, you've inherited it." Lira felt a chill run through her. Her grandmother? She had always known there was something mysterious about the old woman, but this was too much. "But I don't understand," Lira said, her voice cracking. I'm just a delivery girl. My grandmother, she never told me anything about this." Adrien's gaze softened, and he reached out, placing a hand on hers. "Your grandmother protected you. She kept you safe from this world. But now, you have to face it. The curse I speak of, it's what's kept me bound to this life. I've been trapped in a kind of sleep, not truly alive, but not fully dead either. I need your blood to finally break the curse. And if we succeed, everything changes, not just for me, but for our world." Lira pulled her hand away from his, feeling overwhelmed. "What does that even mean? What's so special about my blood?" Adrien stood, walking to the window that overlooked the castle grounds. "My family has been cursed for generations," he said, his back to her. "The curse binds us to this world, forces us to live in a state of eternal suffering. No one has ever been able to break it, not until now." He turned back to face her, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and sadness. "You're the one who can break it, Lira. Your blood is the key. But to do that, you must be willing to risk everything." Lira stood up, her legs unsteady beneath her. She couldn't deny the fear that was building inside her, but there was also something else, something she couldn't ignore. This was bigger than her. This was bigger than anything she had ever imagined. "And if I refuse?" she asked, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. Adrien's face darkened. "Then the curse will continue, and I will never be free. Neither will you." Lira swallowed hard. She had never been one to back down from a challenge, but this was unlike anything she had ever faced. She didn't know what the future held, but one thing was clear. She was already in too deep to turn back now. With a deep breath, she nodded. "Okay, I'll help you." Lira sat there, staring at Adrien as his words slowly sank in. Everything he said felt impossible, like something out of a dark fairy tale. Her blood was the key to breaking a curse that had lasted for centuries? How was that even possible? She was just a simple girl, a delivery worker who had spent her days trying to make ends meet, not someone destined for some grand, supernatural purpose. Adrien's gaze never left her, and the weight of his words hung heavy in the air. His expression was a mix of hope and desperation, and Lira knew that there was no easy way out of this. She had agreed to help him, but she had no idea what that truly meant. "What do we do now?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Adrien stood up and walked to the large stone fireplace that dominated one side of the room. The flames flickered and crackled, casting dancing shadows on the walls. He seemed to gather his thoughts before speaking again. "Now, we prepare," he said, his voice calm but filled with a quiet intensity. "You need to understand what you're getting into. The curse is ancient, and it's not something that can be broken easily. It will take everything from both of us. And even if we succeed, there's no telling what the consequences will be." Lira felt a chill run down her spine. Adrien wasn't trying to scare her, but the weight of his words was enough to make her second-guess everything. Could she really help him? Could she break a curse that had lasted for centuries? And what would it cost her in the end? "I'm ready," she said, her voice more confident than she felt. Adrien turned to face her, his eyes softening for the briefest moment. "I know you are. But this isn't just about us. The world we live in, the world of vampires, is dangerous. There are forces at work far older and more powerful than anything you can imagine. You'll have to face things that will test you in ways you never thought possible." Lira nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never imagined her life would take this turn. She had thought she would always remain in the small, quiet world of her village, living day to day, never knowing about the hidden worlds that existed around her. But now, here she was, standing in a castle with a vampire king, preparing to break a curse that could change everything. "What's the next step?" she asked, trying to focus. Adrien walked over to a nearby table, where ancient-looking scrolls and books were scattered. He picked up a book bound in dark leather and handed it to her. "This book contains the history of the curse," he said. "It's written in a language that only a few can read, but you'll be able to understand it with time. This will tell you what needs to be done to break the curse, and more importantly, what sacrifices must be made." Lira took the book, her hands trembling slightly as she opened it. The pages were filled with intricate writing, symbols, and drawings that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light of the room. It was all foreign to her, but something about it felt familiar, as if it was meant for her to see. As she flipped through the pages, she came across an image of a blood-red moon, surrounded by intricate symbols that seemed to pulse with power. The page was titled, "The Ritual of the Bloodline." "This is what we need," Adrien said, his voice low. "The ritual must be performed under the blood-red moon. Only then will the curse be broken. But we can't do it alone. There are others who will. Try to stop us. Those who benefit from the curse, who want to see me remain trapped in this half-life." Lyra's stomach twisted. She had no idea what she was getting herself into. She had no idea what kind of enemies they were going to face, or what kind of danger she was about to walk into. But one thing was certain, she couldn't back out now. She had made a choice, and that choice had already set her on a path she could never turn back from. "What do we do first?" she asked, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. Adrien reached for a small vial on the table, filled with a dark red liquid. "This," he said, "is the first step. It's the essence of the vampire bloodline. You'll need to drink it. It will unlock the power within you, the power that has been dormant in your blood for generations." Lira took the vial from his hands, hesitating for a moment. She had no idea what it would do to her, but something told her that this was the only way forward. With a deep breath, she uncorked the vial and drank the liquid in one swift motion. The taste was bitter, metallic, and it burned as it slid down her throat. For a moment, nothing happened. But then, a wave of heat surged through her body, and her vision blurred. She stumbled back, trying to steady herself. Adrien caught her arm, his grip firm but gentle. "It's okay," he said, his voice soothing. "It's just the beginning. The power within you is awakening." Lyra's heart raced, and she felt the strange energy coursing through her veins, as if something deep within her had been unlocked. It was both exhilarating and terrifying. She had no idea what the future held, but one thing was certain, She was no longer just a girl from the streets. She was part of something much bigger now, and she was going to have to be strong if she was going to survive what was coming next. Lira sat by the large stone fireplace in the castle's guest chamber, her mind swirling with everything she had learned over the past few days. Her body still pulsed with the strange energy that had awakened when she drank the vial of vampire blood. It had been a week since that moment, and though she had tried to make sense of it all, she couldn't. The power inside her was growing, and with it, a sense of urgency she couldn't ignore. Adrien had given her a training schedule, an intense routine designed to help her harness the newfound abilities that were flowing through her veins. But even as she tried to follow it, she couldn't help but wonder what the cost would be. She was no longer just a delivery girl from the streets of a quiet village. She had become something more, something she wasn't sure she wanted to be. Adrien's footsteps echoed in the hallway outside the room, and Lira straightened up, trying to shake off her doubts. She had promised him she would help him break the curse. She had promised she would be strong, but now that the time had come to face the consequences, she was starting to feel the weight of that promise. Adrien entered the room, his dark eyes locking with hers immediately. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice calm, but carrying an undertone of seriousness. Lira nodded, though a part of her wanted to say no. She had no idea what the next step would entail. "Ready as I'll ever be," she replied, trying to sound confident. Adrien gestured to the table where several ancient texts were laid out. "This next phase is crucial," he said, his expression serious. "The curse is tied to my family's bloodline, and you have to understand how deep it runs before we can move forward. The ritual we're preparing for requires more than just your blood. It requires your understanding of the magic that lies within it." Lira took a deep breath and stood, walking toward the table. The books looked old, ancient, even, and their pages were filled with symbols and writings she couldn't yet understand. Adrien began to explain the complex rituals that had been passed down for generations, describing the steps they would need to take in order to break the curse. Lira listened carefully, her head spinning as she tried to keep up. "The bloodline runs through every generation of my family, and every time the curse was passed down, it weakened. But it was never fully broken," Adrien continued. "That's where you come in. You're the final key." Lira felt a chill creep down her spine. She had no idea why she was chosen for this, but she knew. She had no choice. "What do I have to do?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Adrien's gaze softened, and he stepped closer to her. "You'll have to perform the ritual with me," he explained. "But first, we need to prepare ourselves. The ritual requires an incredible amount of power, and if we're not careful, it could destroy us both." Lira nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. She had already come this far. She wasn't going to back down now. Adrien took a step back and motioned for her to follow him. He led her through the castle's labyrinthine halls to a large, circular chamber that was unlike anything she had seen before. The walls were lined with ornate carvings, and in the center of the room was a large stone altar. A blood-red moon shone through the high, arched windows, casting a surreal glow across the room. Lira felt the weight of the moment settle in her chest. This was it. This was where everything would change. "The ritual must be performed under the light of the blood-red moon," Adrien said, his voice low and reverent. "We don't have much time." Lira's eyes darted to the altar. "What do I need to do?" she asked again, her voice trembling. Adrien turned to face her, his expression intense. "You will need to connect with the bloodline," he said. "Feel the magic that runs through your veins. Let it guide you." Lira closed her eyes, trying to focus. She had felt the power in her blood ever since she drank the vial, but it was chaotic, uncontrolled. How was she supposed to use it? How could she tap into something so ancient? Adrien's hand gently touched her shoulder, grounding her. "Trust me," he said softly. "You have it within you. You just have to let it surface." Lira nodded, taking a deep breath. She focused on the warmth in her chest, the pulse of power that was now a part of her. Slowly, she let the magic flow through her, trying to feel its rhythm, its source. For a moment, she felt nothing but the pounding of her heart. Then, as if something clicked into place, she felt it, a surge of energy, ancient and powerful, coursing through her veins. It was overwhelming, but at the same time, it felt right. It felt like it had always been there, waiting for her to find it. The room seemed to glow brighter as the power surged within her, and she opened her eyes, meeting Adrien's gaze. "I can feel it," she whispered. Adrien smiled, his eyes softening. "Good. Now we can begin." He stepped forward, his hand reaching out to hers. Together, Lira nodded and took his hand, feeling the connection between them deepen as the ritual began. She didn't know what the future held or what this ritual would cost them both, but she knew one thing for sure. She had already made her choice. And she would follow through, no matter what the cost. Lira stood beside the stone altar, her heart racing as the blood-red moon bathed the room in an eerie glow. Adrien's hand was still firmly in hers, their connection more powerful than ever. The air was thick with anticipation, and for a moment, it felt as though time itself had stopped. The ritual was about to begin, and Lira could feel the magic rising within her, a force she had never known existed. "Focus." Adrien's voice was steady, his eyes locked with hers. "Feel the power of the bloodline, the legacy that's been passed down for generations." Lira nodded, though her mind was swirling with uncertainty. This was it, the moment she had been both dreading and anticipating. She had agreed to help Adrien break the curse, but now that the ritual was in front of her, she wasn't sure she was ready. But as she looked into Adrien's amber eyes, she saw not only determination, but trust. He believed in her, and for some reason, that belief gave her strength. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath. The warmth in her chest grew stronger, and slowly, she allowed herself to focus on the power that had awakened inside her. It was a part of her now, just as Adrien had said. The bloodline was within her, coursing through her veins. She could feel it, the energy, ancient and raw, alive with centuries of history. The symbols on the walls of the chamber began to glow, their power reacting to the surge of magic in the air. Lyra's mind flooded with images, memories that weren't hers. She saw the faces of women in her family, their expressions filled with both sorrow and strength. She saw the curse, its origins, its effects, and the toll it had taken. On Adrien's family, it was a legacy of suffering, of a bloodline bound to the curse for centuries, unable to escape. And now, Lira was the key to breaking it. She could feel the weight of that responsibility, but there was no turning back now. With each breath, the power within her grew stronger, more focused. She opened her eyes, locking gaze with Adrien. "I can feel it," she whispered, her voice filled with wonder and fear. "Good," Adrien replied softly, his thumb brushing the back of her hand. "You're ready." The ritual had already begun, but the next step was the most crucial. Adrien slowly stepped away from her, moving to the center of the room where a large stone basin stood, filled with a dark liquid that seemed to shimmer in the moonlight. "This is the blood of the ancients," Adrien explained, his voice steady but filled with reverence. "It is the final ingredient in the ritual. It will bind our bloodlines together and allow us to break the curse." He turned to Lira, his gaze soft but intense. "When you drink it, the magic within you will fully awaken. But be warned, this power comes with a price. Once you accept it, there's no going back." Lira looked at the basin, the dark liquid swirling like smoke, and for the first time since arriving at the castle, doubt crept into her heart. She wasn't sure she was ready for this. Was she willing to pay the price for breaking the curse? What would happen to her once the ritual was complete? But as she looked at Adrien, she knew there was no other choice. He had placed his trust in her, and now, she had to place hers in him. Taking a deep breath, Lira stepped forward. She reached out and dipped her fingers into the blood, feeling the coldness of it as it wrapped around her skin. The moment she made contact, the power within her surged, nearly overwhelming her. Her heart raced, and she could feel the magic flooding her body. It was as if the very essence of her being was changing, shifting to something more than human. She closed her eyes and lifted the blood to her lips. The moment it touched her tongue, the world around her seemed to dissolve. The magic was intoxicating, filling every fiber of her being, flooding her with visions of the past, present, and future. She saw Adrien, his family, the curse that had bound them, and the world they had once ruled. She saw the darkness that had plagued them for centuries, the fear, the pain, the loss. She saw the moment when the curse had begun, a pact made long ago that had doomed them all. And she saw the end, the moment when it would all be over. The blood filled her with a sense of power she had never known. She could feel it, swirling in her veins, alive, burning with a heat that was both terrifying and exhilarating. She could feel Adrien's presence, his power intertwined with hers, and together they would break the curse. But as the magic continued to grow, so did the price. She felt the weight of it, her body trembling, her mind struggling to keep up with the surge of energy that threatened to overwhelm her. It was too much, too fast. Lira. Adrien's voice broke through the chaos in her mind. She looked up to see him standing beside her, his face filled with concern. You need to stay focused. Do not let the power consume you. She nodded, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The magic was more than she had anticipated, but she couldn't stop now. Not when they were so close. With a final effort, Lira reached out and gripped Adrien's hand, grounding herself in his presence. Together, they could do this. Together, they could end the curse that had haunted his family for so long. She took another breath, steadier this time, and focused on the power flowing through her. She could do this. She had to. With one final surge of energy, she reached deep inside herself, pulling the magic from every corner of her being. The curse was going to break, and nothing would stand in their way. Lira could feel the intense power coursing through her, but the further she pushed into it, the more overwhelming it became. The magic within her blood was alive, almost sentient, reacting to her every thought, every movement. It felt like the very essence of her being was being twisted and pulled in every direction, and she struggled to maintain control. Adrien's grip on her hand tightened, a steady anchor in the chaos. His voice broke through the disorienting swirl of energy in her mind. Focus, Lira, he urged, his tone steady despite the mounting tension. You're not alone in this. We're doing this together. The words were like a lifeline, pulling her back from the brink of losing herself. She clung to them, reminding herself why she had come this far. Adrien had placed his trust in her, and now she had to do the same for him. Together, they could end the curse that had plagued his family for centuries. Her breath steadied, though the magic continued to surge, filling her veins with a heat that threatened to burn her from the inside out. But she had to keep going. She had to finish what they had started. She glanced at Adrien, his amber eyes fixed on her with an intensity that matched her own. He was right. They were in this together, and no matter how impossible it seemed, she couldn't back down now. The room around them seemed to pulse with the energy they were both channeling. The walls of the chamber trembled as if reacting to the force of the ritual, and Lira could feel the weight of centuries of magic, waiting to be set free. Adrien stepped closer, his free hand reaching out to the basin of blood in front of them. We need to complete the ritual, he said, his voice low and filled with determination. The curse is too powerful. If we don't finish it now, the consequences will be devastating. Lira nodded, her heart pounding. She didn't fully understand what the curse entailed, but she could feel its dark presence, like a shadow that loomed over Adrien's family. She didn't want to let him down, not now, not when they were so close. What do I need to do? She asked, her voice steady despite the storm of emotions swirling inside her. Adrien's gaze softened. You've already done it, Lira, he said gently. The bloodline is awakened. Now we must seal it. We need to give everything we have to break the curse. Your blood, my blood. Together, they will shatter the chains that bind us. Lira swallowed hard, her throat dry as the weight of his words sank in. They had come so far, but it wasn't over yet. She had to give more. She had to make the ultimate sacrifice. But could she? Could she truly give everything to end the curse, to save Adrien and his family? The questions swirled in her mind, but there was no time to answer them. The ritual had already begun, and there was no turning back. She closed her eyes, reaching deep inside herself for the strength she had found earlier. The power surged again, but this time, it was different. It wasn't chaotic, it wasn't uncontrollable, it was focused, steady, and it was coming from both of them. Adrien's presence beside her, his strength and resolve, gave her the courage to push through. Slowly, she extended her other hand toward the basin, her fingers brushing the dark liquid. The moment she made contact, she felt it. A pulse, a connection, something ancient and powerful binding her to Adrien's bloodline. It was as if their very souls were entwined, merging with the magic that flowed between them. The basin began to glow, the blood inside swirling and shifting as if alive. The room seemed to hum with energy, the very walls vibrating with the power of the curse breaking apart. Lira could feel the darkness that had haunted Adrien's family for centuries begin to dissipate, like a weight being lifted from their shoulders. But even as the magic surged around them, she could feel a lingering sense of danger. The curse was breaking, but it wasn't going down without a fight. Adrien's hand tightened on hers as the power intensified. He was with her, but Lira could sense his struggle. This was their final test. "Stay with me," Adrien said, his voice strained but determined. Lira nodded, her breath coming in short gasps. The power was overwhelming, but she refused to falter. She had made her choice. She would see this through to the end. Together, they would defeat the curse. Together, they would free Adrien and his family. The glowing blood in the basin began to pulse faster, its light blinding. Lyra's entire body shook with the force of the magic, but she held on. She could feel the curse unraveling, the chains of darkness breaking apart piece by piece. And then, with a final surge of energy, the blood in the basin exploded outward, flooding the room with a brilliant, blinding light. Lira cried out, her vision going white as the magic reached its peak. She could feel the curse shattering, its grip on Adrien's family finally breaking. And then, just as suddenly as it had started, the light faded, leaving an overwhelming silence in its wake. Lira collapsed into Adrien's arms, her body exhausted, her mind spinning. She had done it. They had done it. The curse was broken. And though the magic was gone, the bond between them, unseen but unbreakable, remained. As Adrien held her, Lira felt a sense of peace settle over her. The darkness had been lifted, and for the first time in a long time, she could breathe freely. The curse was over, but their journey had just begun. Lira slowly opened her eyes, the blinding light from the ritual fading into a soft glow. Her body felt heavy, as though the magic that had coursed through her was still lingering within every fiber of her being. She could feel Adrien's arms around her, steadying her, grounding her as she struggled to sit up. The weight of what they had just accomplished pressed on her, but it was a weight she no longer feared. The curse that had haunted his family for centuries was finally broken. The room was quiet now, the air thick with the aftermath of their shared power. Adrien's gaze softened as he looked at her, a faint smile tugging at his lips. "We did it," he whispered, his voice filled with awe and relief. Lira nodded, still processing the magnitude of what had just happened. For so long, she had been a simple delivery girl, living a quiet life with her grandmother. Now, she had broken a centuries-old curse and changed the fate of a vampire king. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice hoarse. Adrien's smile faded, and for the first time, a hint of uncertainty crossed his face. "Now, we face the consequences," he said softly. "The curse is gone, but there will be those who will not be pleased with what we've done. There are always consequences when a bloodline is severed, especially one as powerful as mine." Lira frowned, the gravity of his words sinking in. "Are you saying there are still people out there who want to stop us?" Adrien nodded, his expression darkening. "There are factions within the vampire world who thrive on the power the curse provided. They will want to keep things as they are, to maintain the control they had over my family. Now that the curse is broken, their grip on us is gone, and they won't let it go without a fight." Lira felt a chill run down her spine. She hadn't even considered that their victory might come with more danger. "What do we do?" she asked, her voice steady but filled with concern. Adrien took a deep breath, his hand gently resting on her shoulder. "We prepare," he said. "We've won this battle, but there's a war ahead. There will be those who seek to destroy what we've built. But we're not alone in this. We have allies, vampires who still believe in honor, in the old ways. They will help us fight back." Lira nodded, trying to steady her racing thoughts. She had known there would be challenges, but this? She had no idea how deep the vampire politics went, or how far Adrien's enemies would go to regain the power they had lost. "I'm with you," she said, her voice unwavering. Adrien looked at her, his amber eyes shining with something deeper than just gratitude. "I know you are," he said, his voice soft. "And that's why we will win." Over the next few days, Lira and Adrien worked together to fortify the castle and prepare for the battles to come. Adrien had already begun reaching out to his allies, calling on the few who remained loyal to him and the old ways of his bloodline. Lira, despite the uncertainty and fear that lingered in her heart, threw herself into the preparations. She had never been one to shy away from a challenge, and this was no different. But as the days passed, the weight of their situation began to sink in. There were whispers of vampire factions gathering, of enemies plotting in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. Lira could feel the tension building, and though she tried to remain strong, she knew that things were about to get much worse before they got better. One evening, as Lira stood by the window, looking out at the horizon, Adrien approached her. He was quiet, as if lost in thought, but she could sense the weight on him. "What's wrong?" she asked, her voice soft. Adrien turned to her, his gaze filled with a mix of sadness and resolve. "I've been thinking," he began, "about everything that's happened. About the curse, about my family, about you." Lira turned to face him, her brow furrowing slightly. "What do you mean?" she asked. Adrien took a deep breath before continuing. "I never expected this. I never expected you, of all people, to come into my life and change everything. You've broken the curse, saved me from my own past, and now," he trailed off, his voice thick with emotion. "Now I'm not sure what comes next. My life has been tied to the curse for so long. I don't know who I am without it." Lira stepped closer, her hand resting on his. "You're Adrien," she said softly. "You don't need the curse to define you. You've already proven that you're stronger than it ever was." Adrien smiled faintly, squeezing her hand. "I hope you're right." But even as he spoke the words, Lira could sense the doubt lingering in him. He had spent centuries in the shadow of the curse, and now that it was gone, he was left to rebuild his life from the ground up. They both were. But Lira knew one thing for sure. They wouldn't be doing it alone. Together, they could face whatever came next. And even though the road ahead was uncertain, she felt more certain than ever that they were strong enough to walk it, side by side. Lira stood at the edge of the castle's grand balcony, gazing out over the vast expanse of the land. The sun was setting, casting a golden hue over the darkened forest that stretched out before her. It had been weeks since the curse was broken, yet the weight of everything that had happened still felt like a heavy cloud hanging over them. Adrien had been distant lately, lost in his thoughts, consumed by the realization of what came next. She understood it, of course. For centuries, his life had been tied to the curse, and now that it was gone, the future seemed uncertain, even for someone as powerful as him. But Lira was beginning to see something else beneath the surface, the quiet struggle he was facing. The man who had once been bound by darkness was now free, and yet, there was a void within him. She couldn't help but wonder if he would ever feel whole again. Adrien joined her on the balcony, his presence steady and silent as he leaned against the stone railing next to her. "It's beautiful," he said softly, his eyes on the same horizon she had been lost in. "The world looks different now. I didn't realize how much I had taken it for granted." Lira glanced at him, noticing the way his shoulders sagged slightly, as though he were still carrying an unseen weight. "You're free now," she said gently. "The curse is broken. You don't have to carry that burden anymore." Adrien's gaze turned to her, and for a moment, there was a flicker of something, uncertainty, maybe. "But who am I without it?" he asked, his voice laced with quiet sorrow. "For so long, everything I've known, everything I've fought for, has been tied to the curse. Now it's gone, and I'm left trying to figure out what comes next." Lira reached out, placing her hand on his. It was warm, steady. "You're Adrien," she said firmly. "You're not the curse. You're not defined by what happened to you." His eyes softened, but the doubt in them lingered. "But who am I without it? What do I even do now?" Lira squeezed his hand, trying to steady the storm she saw brewing within him. "You find a new purpose. You find who you want to be, not who you've had to be." Adrien was silent for a long moment, his gaze drifting back to the landscape below. Lira could feel the weight of his thoughts, the unspoken fear that he might never find peace, never find his place in a world that had been so altered by the curse. But she refused to believe that. He had already proven that he was more than the curse. He had fought through centuries of pain, of loss, and had emerged stronger. And now, it was his time to live a life free from the chains of the past. Lira took a deep breath, turning to face him fully. "We've both been given a second chance," she said. "We have the opportunity to build something new, something better, together." Adrien met her gaze then, the flicker of doubt slowly fading as he saw the resolve in her eyes. Together, he echoed, his voice steadier. Lira nodded. Together. We're not alone in this. We have each other, and we'll figure out the rest as we go. He exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders easing. He looked out over the land once more, his expression thoughtful. Maybe you're right, he said softly. Maybe this is just the beginning of something new. For the first time in what felt like forever, Lira saw a glimmer of hope in his eyes. It wasn't the same as before, when he had been bound by the curse, but it was there, real and tangible. It wasn't the end of their journey, but a new chapter. They had fought for freedom, for a future, and now they had it. The question was, what would they do with it? The world outside was still full of dangers, of people who would seek to regain the power they had lost. But now, Lira felt a surge of determination rise within her. She wasn't going to let fear hold them back. I think, she began, her voice firm. We need to find those who can help us rebuild, Adrien. There are still many out there who want to keep things the way they were. We can't let that happen. We have to fight for what's right, for the future. Adrien turned to her, his eyes searching hers. He had seen the strength in her before, but now, he saw something else. Hope. You're right, he said, his voice quiet but resolute. We fight, together. It wasn't just about breaking the curse anymore. It wasn't about the past or the battles they had fought before. It was about the future they would build, the life they would create. Adrien had spent centuries trapped in darkness, but now, he had a chance to embrace the light. And with Lira by his side, he was ready to face whatever came next. As the last of the sun dipped below the horizon, they stood together, two souls bound not by a curse, but by choice. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, they both felt ready to face it. The journey ahead was theirs to shape, and together, they would forge a path forward, a path of their own making. Lira stood by Adrien's side as they looked out over the quiet, vast expanse of the land that stretched beyond the castle's gates. The world felt different now, quieter somehow, as if it too was waiting to see what they would do next. The curse had been broken, but the road ahead was still uncertain. They had won a battle, but the war wasn't over. They both knew that. Adrien, though he had found peace in the breaking of his family's curse, still carried the weight of centuries of loss and struggle. And Lira, she had come to understand that breaking the curse was just the beginning of a much larger journey. They needed to rebuild, to gather allies, to protect what they had fought for. The moment of quiet victory they had shared now felt like a brief pause before the storm. What now? Lira asked softly, her voice filled with the weight of everything still left to do. Adrien turned to face her, his expression calm but resolute. Now we fight, he said, his voice steady. Now we gather the forces that still believe in what we stand for. We rebuild what has been lost, but we also protect what we've just gained. Lira nodded, the determination in her heart matching his. She knew what was at stake. Adrien had given her more than she ever imagined. Freedom, hope, and the chance to live a life she never thought possible. And now, she had to help him protect it, protect both their futures. They had already gathered a handful of allies, loyal vampires who still remembered the old ways, those who believed in honor, in what their kind used to be before the curse had twisted it all. But there were still others lurking in the shadows, enemies who would never accept the breaking of the curse. Adrien's family had ruled with power and fear for so long, and those who benefited from that rule would not let go easily. The air was thick with the sense of something approaching, something big. Lira felt it, just like Adrien did. It wasn't just about the curse anymore. It was about a power shift. We can't fight this alone, Lira said, her voice firm now, with the clarity that had grown in her since they had first broken the curse. We need to reach out to the other vampire factions. There are more of us, more who still believe in what we could be. We need to unite. Adrien's eyes sparkled with a hint of admiration. I was hoping you'd say that, he said quietly. You're right. We have to build a coalition, not just for our own survival, but for the future of our kind. If we don't, we risk falling back into the shadows of the past. Lira knew the road ahead would not be easy. The political landscape among vampires was complex, steeped in centuries of traditions, grudges, and power struggles. There would be alliances forged in secret, betrayals that could tear them apart from within. But if there was one thing she had learned in the time she had spent with Adrien, it was this: there was always a choice. They had the power to shape their own future, to redefine what it meant to be free. And they would do that, together. Over the next several weeks, they traveled far and wide, meeting with various factions, some loyal, others skeptical, all with their own agendas. Adrien's status as the Vampire King gave him power, but it was also a curse in itself. Many resented him for the power he had once held, for the long history of oppression his family had brought to their kind. Lira saw this firsthand. She saw the cold glares, the whispers behind their backs, and the subtle threats that came in the form of veiled compliments. But she also saw something else, the hope in the eyes of those who still believed in a different future. They were not all lost to the darkness. The journey was long, and every step forward felt like it took them deeper into a web of danger and intrigue. But with each new ally they gained, with each new promise made, Lira felt something stirring inside her. She wasn't just a pawn in Adrien's world anymore. She was a force in her own right, a key player in a revolution that was slowly taking shape. As they crossed the final threshold into the heart of the Vampire Council's territory, Lira felt a shift within herself. This was no longer just about breaking a curse. This was about rewriting the rules, about taking control of their own destinies. The council was the last great power that stood in their way. If they could sway them, they would have the backing they needed to bring real change. Adrien turned to her as they approached the grand hall where the council would convene. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice tinged with something, perhaps hope, perhaps fear. Lira met his gaze, the fire in her eyes matching his. "We've come this far. We're ready for whatever comes next," she said, her voice steady. Adrien smiled, and for the first time in a long time, it was a smile that was not burdened by the weight of the past. "Together," he said, and in that simple word, Lira knew they could face anything. They entered the hall as a united front, ready to challenge everything that had come before. This was their fight now. The fight for their future, for their freedom, and for a world where they could both stand side by side, not as enemies, but as equals. Lira and Adrien stood before the grand doors of the Vampire Council's hall, their hearts beating in unison as the weight of what they were about to face pressed down on them. This was the moment that could change everything, could define the future not just for them, but for their entire world. The council was a body of the most powerful vampires, the ones who controlled the fate of their kind. For centuries, they had lived in the shadows, holding on to power through fear and manipulation. But that was before the curse was broken, before Adrien and Lira came into the picture. This time, things would be different. Adrien squeezed Lira's hand, his touch warm despite the tension in the air. "Are you ready?" he asked, his voice soft but laced with the same determination she had come to expect from him. Lira looked at him, her eyes meeting his with the steady resolve she had felt building in her heart over the past weeks. "We're not here to ask for permission," she said firmly. "We're here to make sure the world changes, whether they like it or not." Adrien smiled, a flicker of pride in his eyes. He could feel the strength radiating from Lira, the woman who had once been a stranger to him, now standing beside him as an equal, a partner in this fight. Together, they had already accomplished the impossible, and now, together, they would face the last great obstacle. The doors creaked open before them, revealing a large, circular chamber. The walls were adorned with ancient tapestries, depicting battles, victories, and the history of vampire rule. At the center of the room, a long stone table stretched out before them, and seated around it were the members of the Vampire Council. They were a varied group, some young, some old, but all radiating an aura of power that could intimidate anyone who dared to enter their presence. Lira felt a shiver run down her spine as she entered the room, but she kept her head held high. Adrien stepped forward, his presence commanding, and Lira followed closely behind him. The council members' eyes flicked toward them, some with curiosity, others with disdain. They knew who Adrien was, of course, the former Vampire King, the one who had been cursed for centuries, and now, the one who had broken that curse. What they didn't know was the power they had just unleashed by allowing him to step back into the world. The room fell silent as Adrien reached the center, standing tall before the council. "We have come to end the cycle of oppression that has ruled our kind for far too long," he said, his voice echoing in the chamber. "The curse that bound my family to this life is broken, and it's time for us to move forward, together." A murmur rippled through the council, and Lira could see the unease in some of their eyes. They had not expected this, nor had they expected her. She could feel the weight of their gaze, the judgment, but she didn't let it show. She stood beside Adrien, unwavering, knowing that together, they were unstoppable. The head of the council, a tall vampire with platinum blonde hair and cold blue eyes, leaned forward. His expression was hard to read, but his voice, when he spoke, was sharp. "You speak of change," he said, his voice dripping with skepticism. "But change doesn't come without consequences. You think you can simply walk in here and dismantle centuries of tradition?" Adrien's gaze never wavered. "The tradition you speak of has caused nothing but pain and suffering," he said. "For too long, we've lived under a system of fear and control. It ends now." The council leader's eyes narrowed, but before he could respond, Lira stepped forward. "You've been hiding behind your traditions for far too long," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "It's time to face the truth. The world is changing, whether you want it to or not. Adrien is no longer bound by the curse. He is free, and so are we. The old ways are gone. It's time to move forward." There was a long silence. The council members exchanged glances, their faces unreadable. Lira could feel the heat rising in the room, the quiet tension that filled the space. She knew the decision before them was monumental. Some of the council members would resist, fight against the change that was coming. But others, those who had seen the cracks in the old system, might be willing to listen. Adrien stepped closer to the table, his eyes scanning the council members. "We're not asking for your approval," he said, his voice low but powerful. "We're here to take the first step toward a new future, one where power isn't hoarded by the few, but shared by all. You can either be a part of that future or be left behind." The room was still, the air thick with the weight of his words. Finally, the council leader spoke again, his tone colder now. "And what if we refuse?" he asked. "What if we decide that your vision for the future is not one we want to follow?" Adrien's gaze hardened, and for the first time, Lira saw the full extent of his power, unfettered, unbroken. "Then you will be the ones who stand in the way of progress," he said. "And in that case, we will have no choice but to go through you." The challenge was clear. There was no room for compromise, no middle ground. The old ways were dead, and the council had a choice to make. Stand with them in the fight for a new world or stand against them and risk being left behind. The council leader remained silent, his lips pressed into a thin line. But in his eyes, Lira saw something, a flicker of doubt, of uncertainty. They had come here to end the cycle, and they had made their case. The question was now, would the council agree, or would they fight to keep their power? The silence in the room grew heavier, and Lira knew the moment of decision had come. Adrien had done his part. Now it was time for the council to decide whether they would allow the change they had brought or risk everything to preserve the past. Lira stood in the silence of the Vampire Council's hall, her heart pounding in her chest. The moment they had fought for had finally come, and now, all eyes were on them. Adrien had challenged the council, demanding that they embrace the future or face the consequences. The air was thick with tension as the council members exchanged glances, trying to decide whether they would accept Adrien's vision or fight to maintain their power. The leader of the council, the same vampire who had spoken with such disdain earlier, narrowed his eyes and leaned back in his chair. He studied Adrien for a long moment, his gaze cold and calculating. The silence was unbearable. Lira felt as though the weight of the decision pressed down on her, every breath heavy with anticipation. She could see the hesitation in the leader's eyes, a flicker of doubt that hadn't been there before. The time for words was over. Now it was about action. "You have made your case," the council leader said at last, his voice low and sharp. "But you forget one thing, Adrien. We are the ones who decide what happens to our kind. Not you. Not some human." Lira's breath caught at his words, but she held her ground. Adrien's jaw tightened, but his eyes never wavered. "You have had your time. Your time of ruling through fear is over. We are not asking for permission. We are telling you that the old ways are gone." The council leader stood, his tall, imposing figure casting a shadow across the room. He was a powerful vampire, his centuries of rule evident in the strength he projected. But Lira could sense his faltering. The doubt was there, the fear of losing control. He was scared. "You think the others will follow you?" the leader asked, his voice laced with mockery. The factions, the clans that have been around for centuries? They won't bow to you just because you broke a curse. Adrien took a step forward, his gaze unwavering. I'm not asking them to bow. I'm asking them to join us. Together, we can create a world where power isn't controlled by a few. We can build something new. There was a tense silence, and Lira could feel the weight of the moment settle around them. The leader's eyes flickered to the other council members, his gaze seeking validation. But none of them spoke. Adrien's words were sinking in, planting seeds of doubt in their minds. Finally, the leader spoke, his voice laced with venom. You are nothing without us, Adrien. You may have broken the curse, but you are still bound by the same bloodline, the same history. You cannot erase that. Lira stepped forward, her voice steady but filled with conviction. We don't need to erase history. We need to move past it. We don't need to be controlled by the past anymore. The leader's eyes narrowed. And what of you, human? He sneered. What part do you play in all of this? You are nothing but a pawn in his game. Lira didn't flinch. I am not a pawn, she said firmly. I have a role to play, just like everyone else in this room. I helped break the curse. I helped free Adrien. And I will continue to fight for a better future for all of us. The council leader scowled, clearly displeased by her words. You speak as if you understand our world. You are nothing but a fragile human, playing with forces you cannot control. Adrien stepped forward, his voice cold and commanding. Enough. The time for words is over. You will either stand with us, or you will be left behind. The tension in the room was palpable. Lira could feel the magic swirling in the air, thick with the weight of their words and the power of their convictions. The council leader opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, another voice rang out from the back of the room. He's right, a female voice said, strong and clear. All heads turned to see one of the council members, a woman with silver hair and piercing green eyes, standing. She was one of the younger members of the council, someone who had always been considered an outsider in their traditional, rigid world. For too long, we've clung to the old ways. For too long, we've allowed fear and power to dictate our actions. But look at us now. The world is changing, and if we don't change with it, we will be left behind, just like the rest of the old world. The room fell silent as the other council members considered her words. Lira's heart raced. The support they had hoped for had come from an unexpected source. The woman, the one who had always been quiet and observant, had spoken out. You're right, another voice said, this one from a council member with a deep voice, heavy with age. The world is changing. It has been for some time. If we continue to stand in the way, we will be the ones who destroy what's left of our kind. Lira felt the shift in the room, a quiet shift, but a shift nonetheless. The tide was turning. Adrien had already won some of them over. The question was now, who else would follow? The leader of the council, seeing the cracks in his power, looked around the room in growing frustration. You're all fools, he spat, his voice laced with fury. You'll regret this. With that, he stormed out of the room, his cloak trailing behind him like a shadow. The remaining council members looked to Adrien and Lira, and for the first time, Lira saw a flicker of hope in their eyes. What comes next? The silver-haired woman asked, her voice soft yet filled with strength. Adrien took a deep breath and turned to face the council members who remained. Now we build. We rebuild what has been broken, and we forge a new future together. No more fear. No more oppression. We stand as equals. The words rang through the room, resonating with the truth of what had to be done. Lira felt the power of that moment settle deep within her. They had taken the first step, but this was only the beginning. Together, they could change the world. And they would. Lira stood beside Adrien, the weight of everything they had fought for still pressing on her shoulders. The Vampire Council had finally agreed to join them, to break away from the old ways that had ruled their world for centuries. But as the new future began to take shape, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The path ahead would be filled with challenges, dangers, and hard decisions. Yet, as she stood there beside Adrien, she knew one thing for sure. They would face it together. They had already fought the darkness, and now they would fight for the light. It had been several months since the council had accepted their new vision. Adrien had begun the arduous task of rebuilding the vampire world, bringing together those who believed in the future they were creating. There were some who resisted, of course. those who had grown comfortable with the power and control of the old order, but they had found allies in unexpected places. And with each victory, no matter how small, the world began to shift, one piece at a time. Lira had stood beside Adrien through every step, every negotiation, every difficult decision. She had become not just a partner to him, but a leader in her own right. Together, they had created a new order, one where power was not hoarded by a select few, but shared by all who were willing to fight for it. But there were still those who would stop at nothing to regain their lost power. As Adrien sat in his study, his fingers lightly tapping on the edge of his desk, Lira could see the weight of the world on his shoulders. His amber eyes were focused, but there was a fatigue in them, a weariness that seemed to deepen with each passing day. She stepped into the room quietly, her soft footsteps barely audible on the stone floor. "How are you holding up?" she asked, her voice gentle but filled with concern. Adrien looked up at her, offering a tired smile. "I'm fine," he said, but Lira could hear the strain in his voice. There's still so much to be done. So many factions to unite, so many enemies to face. Lira walked over to his side and placed a hand on his shoulder. "You don't have to do this alone, Adrien. We're in this together." Adrien met her gaze, and for the first time in a while, the hardness in his eyes softened. "I know," he said quietly, "but sometimes it feels like the weight of it all is too much to bear." Lira squeezed his shoulder reassuringly. "You've carried the weight of centuries on your back. You're not alone anymore. We've come so far. We've already changed the course of our world. And together, we'll keep changing it, one step at a time." Adrien looked up at her, his eyes searching hers, as though looking for the strength that had always been there. "You're right," he said, his voice steadier now. "We've already made history, and we'll keep making it." The sound of a soft knock interrupted their conversation, and the door creaked open to reveal one of Adrien's allies, a vampire leader who had joined their cause. "We've received word of a gathering," the vampire said, his voice urgent. "There are factions plotting against us. They're still trying to maintain control, and they won't stop until they have it back." Adrien's jaw tightened. "I knew this day would come." He stood up, his posture straightening with the familiar strength and power that had always defined him. "Prepare the council. We'll face them head on." Lyra's heart quickened, but she felt the familiar surge of determination that had carried her through their darkest moments. "We've already faced worse," she said, her voice steady. "We'll win this too." Adrien turned to her, a flicker of admiration in his eyes. "Together," he said, and she nodded, knowing that no matter what came next, they would face it together. The days that followed were filled with strategy meetings, preparation, and the gathering of their forces. They would not back down. The world they had fought so hard to build would not be taken from them. Lira stood alongside Adrien as they prepared for the final confrontation, knowing that this would be the true test of everything they had worked for. But she also knew that they had come too far to fail. The battle was fierce, but they were not alone. The allies they had gathered, the strength of their resolve, and the bond they shared carried them through. Adrien fought like a king, but it was his heart, the love and loyalty he had for those by his side, that made him unstoppable. And Lira, standing by him, was the anchor that kept him grounded. As the battle raged on and the enemies of their new world fell one by one, Adrien and Lira found themselves standing victorious once again. But this time, it wasn't just a victory over the curse. It was a victory over fear, over the old ways that had kept their kind in darkness for so long. They had forged a new path, and together, they would continue to walk it. The dust settled, and Adrien turned to Lira, his eyes filled with gratitude and something deeper, a sense of peace. "We did it," he said softly. Lira smiled, her heart full. "We did it." And with that, they stood together, side by side, ready to face the future they had built, knowing that no matter what challenges came their way, they had already proven they could overcome anything, as long as they faced it together.